Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned in to Unity FM 93.5, the heart of the city. And this evening we are going to be talking about marriage and how we can find the correct partner, inshallah, to have that wonderful, wonderful married life that people yearn for and want in their lives. Often we think of the Cinderella concept, where the man will come in shining armour, or this is what young people tell me, that they think the man will come in shining armour, sweep them off their feet and live happily ever after. But does that always happen? In reality, I think it doesn't happen very often. And nowadays we need to be realistic when we're looking at marriage, looking at that commitment together. How do we find the correct person? So this evening we're going to focus on that, focus on marriage, looking at trying to find the correct person, inshallah, so that we have a happy future together and be parents and role models to our children, to those children that will come along, inshallah, in this happy marriage. This evening I have with me in the studio Brother Omar Sabir. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, brother.
Wa alaikum salam, sister. You okay?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
It's a privilege being interviewing you. It's my first time interviewing, mashallah, the assistant station manager here in Unity FM. I'm a little bit nervous, actually.
Jazakallah. I'm sure many of the listeners will recognise my voice from the plethora of shows that I tend to end up doing.
Mashallah. So you're more used to being at this side of the desk than me.
Yes, it's unusual to be on this side of the desk being interviewed.
Mashallah, mashallah. But it's going to be a really good topic, and I think it's something that listeners really want to hear about, especially now we're going into this wedding pre-Ramadan rush, if I could call it that. And then after Ramadan, there's all those weddings over the summers as well. And what are we doing? Are we doing the right thing? Have we found the right person? All these questions come into people's minds. I know our listeners are also tuned into us down in Luton, so thank you for tuning in on 105.1 FM, Inspire FM down there. If you have any questions about this programme or want to ask Brother Omar anything later on, please do email the studio at unityfm.net, and they will pass on the emails to either myself or to Brother Omar, and we will give you an answer or find somebody who can give you a suitable answer, inshallah. So, Brother Omar, where do we start with all this topic, really? This marriage is a big thing. Where do we start?
You know, it's quite funny because a lot of people think it's an event, but it's not. It's a stage of your life, in my opinion. It's so when people talk about weddings, they see it as an event, but they often forget it's just day one almost of a stage of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a really important thing to remember, that it's going to be a huge decision. It's not something that's just a one-off. It's not a day for dress up. A lot of people kind of think that's what it is. It's a party day. It's a dress up day, forgetting that it's years and years of work and so much more after that. I
definitely agree with you. I actually only met somebody at the weekend, and I was congratulating her for her wedding because I missed her wedding, and I said, how's married life going? So excited. And she said, I'm divorced. The floor opened underneath me because actually I was there congratulating her. She was a young girl, very, very young, got married very young. And I think because of situations like this and others, she's not the only person that I've come across. We need to talk about marriage more. We need people to understand that this is a process, as you said. It is not, I like the way you put it, as a dress-up day or a free holiday. Yeah. Some people might think because they're getting all this money for their wedding that they pay the honeymoon, that covers the honeymoon costs, and they think, oh, it's a free holiday. But it's not like that. No, it's not. It's I think, again, it's a misconception with a lot of... And I think it's important because I'm in the age bracket. I'm 25 years old, so I've got friends on either side that are getting married, left, right and centre, and I'm talking to a lot of them. And they're obviously telling me that, people have... I've got a spectrum of friends. Some of them are telling me that they were ready to get married 2 years ago and they got married. Some of them are ready to get married now. Some of them are talking, they're like, marriage isn't even on the cards for me yet. So I think that's such a huge thing, that it's a huge event at the end of the day of your life, and it's going to set up this whole new phase of your life. And a lot of people
don't understand what it exactly is and what it entails. Because for one reason or another, people get to the age of, let's say, 25. So when you're younger, you tend to concentrate on school.
Yeah.
You finish school, you tend to concentrate on college.
Yeah.
You finish college, you tend to concentrate on university. You finish university, you focus on getting your first job, setting yourself up. And then you think, and almost it feels like a natural progression that the next event should be marriage. And while that linear progression, I think, works for university and for jobs, it's not something where it's a milestone. And I think that's a common misconception. People are starting to think it's almost a milestone in their early lives to get married.
Whereas some people may be ready earlier on and mature earlier on, other people may not be and may not be ready for later on to mature until later in their lives.
So the same with, for example, university. Most people understand that in the majority of cases you go to university at a set age. And people kind of have that same misconception with marriage, I think, a little. They think there's a certain age bracket you get married in and that's it. And whether or not you've prepared for it before or after or whatever, that's it. You just get married, and it's like going to university. Whether or not you're ready for it, you're just thrown into it. And I think that's a really dangerous attitude to take into something so, so big as marriage.
Yes, a commitment for the future, your future mother or father of your children.
Exactly.
This is a huge, big step. And I know while there is some courses out there that people can look up and helps people to prepare for this, how do they know themselves that they are ready even to attend a course like this? If there was a group of your friends now, Brother Omar, around you, and they're hanging out with you and they're talking about this, what advice would you give them if they were asking you, am I ready for this step?
So my first advice is, have you actually sort of talked to yourself about it? Now, when I talk to my friends, and a lot of them, when they were considering their first jobs, their careers, changing jobs, changing careers, they spend so long deliberating on it. On a personal level, they'll sit there, they'll sit there in bed sometimes going, is it good for me? Should I change? I like this about my job. I don't like this about my job. Will the new job have this? All of these hundreds upon thousands of questions they'll ask themselves over a span of months.
Yeah.
But do people do that when it's time for marriage? Do people?
I wonder.
Yeah, because I get the feeling a lot of people don't. They don't actually talk to themselves. They may talk to somebody else. Now, the problem with talking to somebody else, in my opinion, is you may not have firstly formulated your own opinions, and secondly, you may be putting on a face or a facade that you are ready or you aren't ready, regardless of what the real opinion is. But when you're talking to yourself, you can be really honest, I think. I think that's something a lot of people need to do.
And talk to themselves, understand themselves. Who are they?
I think this is a huge thing. And I think this is my most important tip to a lot of people out there, is know who you are. And I know that sounds like a cliche. It sounds like, I completely appreciate that it sounds like a cliche. But if I said to somebody, do you know what you love? What do you love? What are your hobbies? If I said to you, you could quit your job today, go find your dream job, get paid as much as you wanted, do as much as little of this imaginary thing, do you know what that is? Because a lot of people don't. They haven't found that. And again, that's because they've gone to college, gone to university, and they've not had a chance to stop and breathe. And I understand that. I appreciate that. I did that. It has come to a stage now where you're so focused on, for example, you do your GCSEs, you do your A-levels, and it's not just a case of doing your exams. You need to now think of, okay, I now need to make myself competitive, do the Duke of Edinburgh Award, all of these things that happen. So you take away a lot of your free time, and a lot of people aren't finding themselves. Something that maybe a couple of generations ago were a bit easier, because even if they went to school or college, university, they would go home and have themselves time. Yeah. People don't have that as much anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. There is a time when we all had that. Media wasn't so much in our face, so television programs wasn't continuously, so you had that more one-to-one time, or you might have been living away from home, so you were stuck in a flat and nothing happening. So you reflected on yourself, got to think about yourself. Where am I going in my life? What am I doing with my life? The only thing that I can compare it with personally is a conversion. I can say myself, when I converted, that was a huge self-development time that I actually had to explore myself and ask myself some very difficult questions. So if you haven't gone through that, Or if you're not prepared to ask yourself those difficult questions, you could just be riding on the wave going through life.
So that's the problem. And the problem with that attitude is you may come off the wave sort of sometimes without realizing the severity of the situations. You know, sometimes you may not be ready for marriage. You may not have even considered it. But because you're sort of in a bit of, I would say, maybe like self-denial about asking yourself that question, somebody suggests marriage, one thing leads to another, 9 months, 1 year down the line, you know, you've got married and then you've not thought about it properly because you've put like a mental barrier and a mental block on asking yourself that question. So I think a lot of people need to ask themselves that question, because even if the answer is, no, I'm not ready, that's a massive step forward, in my opinion. That's at least an answer that they know. And then they don't run the risk of maybe getting married before they're ready. And I think that is a reason why, and I see this on a personal level, because some of the friends I have as well, I'm quite lucky in the fact that I have a category of friends which are about 8 to 9 years older than me.
Oh, that's very lucky.
So I kind of see their personal development as well, and they've got married, but unfortunately some of them are starting to get divorced now.
Oh.
So I've started to see that from a personal level, and I talk to them and I can understand how it's happened, and that's because they didn't understand what they were getting themselves into, in my opinion. And they say that themselves. They say, you know, I didn't understand. Nobody really talked to me. I didn't speak to myself about it. You know, we didn't speak to each other about it. All of these things, it happens.
And what were they relying on? Were they relying on others was it more traditional weddings, or was it they wanted to protect themselves because they didn't want to be getting into something that was non-Islamic in a relationship? And
you know, it falls on such a wide spectrum, and I think this is something that a lot of people that, you know, my age are considering getting married, so are going to appreciate and recognize is, in my opinion, I think there are 3 main ways of getting married in today's society. So either A, you find your partner yourself, and that could be a colleague at work, somebody at university, classmate, one of your friends, someone in a social circle, maybe someone in the ISOC, someone in a charity you volunteer at, all of those. There's opportunities to meet people. You meet someone, you know, for one reason or another, you decide that they're going to make a good partner. You do that full sort of instigation yourself with each other, and then you decide. So that's one. The second one, which is something that I personally did, was I started speaking to friends and I said, look, you guys know me the best. You guys know your friends the best. Try to see if you can see anyone who would be compatible. Again, that's, you know, quite a good way, in my opinion, because sometimes your friends recognize the less pretty side of yourself. You know, if you've got friends that may be a little short-tempered or a little fussy or a bit, you know, constantly flaky or often, your friends know that about you, and then they can know to match that sometimes. Or the third option, and this is quite a funny option, that people let their parents arrange their marriage, or people's parents arrange their marriage without their knowing. But I find it quite ironic at the end of the day that I actually know people who have said to their parents, look, find me a wife, I'm not bothered.
Yes, I've heard this also.
And it's quite funny, because when I talk to my older brothers and sisters and uncles who are around the 35, 40 age bracket, they spend so long fighting against that, that this whole idea of my parents will pick my wife or my parents will pick my husband. But I think in the younger age category, people are just sort of like, I'm too busy to find somebody, or, you know, just find somebody. And again, that is if done right, I think that could also work. I think, you know, if done right, all 3 options work. And that's my personal opinion. If done right, all 3 of them work. But again, it's about finding that balance. And that's hard. And each of those methods have different pitfalls, pros and cons. So it's just something that I think people need to take time.
Yeah. To reflect on and to think about themselves. So first starting with themselves. So if we just tease out that a little bit more about, you know, how can people find themselves? Yes, they need some time to explore themselves, but what else can they do to find themselves, to find who they are? Or how long do you think they should be doing this process? Or is there any kind of set limits around this?
I don't think there is, personally. I think somebody can go almost into spending a bit of time to get to know themselves and know themselves within a week. I think some people may take 5 years to get there. I don't think there is a set thing where people can go, you need to spend 6 months almost in like some sort of, almost a form of like ibadah where you're just sort of just trying to constantly find yourself. It's like, you don't need to meditate. You don't need to take up
So you don't be like a monk, lock yourself
you
away.
Yeah, you don't need to do that, in my opinion. There's no set formula, but there is this sort of idea that you need to be comfortable of who you are. For example, your hobbies. Are you doing your hobby because you love it, or are you doing it because all your friends love it?
Yeah.
So if I said to somebody, for example, what's your hobby? And they said to me, football. And I'm like, okay, do you like football? Yes. Do your friends like football? Yes. If your friends didn't like football, would you care about it? I don't know. Well, then I would wonder, is that really your hobby? So when you get married, and in essence, maybe you might think football's your identity.
Yeah.
So one of the natural things that happens in marriage is you grow close with your partner, and naturally you slowly drift away from your friends a little. A good healthy distance where you separate from your friends. If your identity was linked to your friends, what happens then? Because then you're in a state of you don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that's something a lot of people need to look at.
And they mightn't even consider that, indeed, yeah. So what about people that try and find themselves, look at their parents to see the positives and the negatives of their parents in understanding themselves more?
So I would say, this touches upon a really interesting concept. And I would say to everybody, one question I would ask anybody who goes, I'm ready for marriage. If somebody came and said that to me, one of my friends goes, Omar, I'm ready for marriage. I would ask them a question. What's your most negative characteristic? And I would love to see how they answer that, because in my opinion, that is a crux question of how much they've actually thought about it all. Because if you are thinking about if you're ready for marriage, then you've probably thought about how you're going to be, with someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're thinking about that, are you thinking about what potential characteristics of somebody that would get on your nerves, and what if your characteristics will get on their nerves? If somebody hasn't identified their most annoying characteristic, I would say to them, you need to really look at it and think, because without knowing your pros and your cons, you're not going to be able to match up against somebody else.
So you need some pros, you need some commonalities with the other person. You need to know what it is that you like doing, that you like as a career, what your career is. So there's some match, or a hobby or something, that there's something there, as well as personalities.
Yeah.
So what are my personality? What are things that I really enjoy, my personality? What kind of a person am I? Am I a quiet person? Am I a loud person? Am I the one that needs all the attention to come on me?
Yeah.
Am I the one that don't like all the attention? Do I like just plodding on and people don't know what I actually do? All of these things are important to understand you as a person, as a character. Because
I think this leads to an interesting thing where I think personally, if people did this, you'd see a massive drop in divorce rates. We have some statistics around divorce rates, and we know that when people attend a pre-marriage course, actually it's only up to 3 years afterwards, but for up to 3 years afterwards, there's a dramatic effect on those marriages. So we need more research, of course, to be done on this, inshallah. But you talk to some people, for example, and you say to them, oh, how come you and your ex-wife got divorced, or how come you and your ex-husband got divorced? And they'll be like, well, I love eating out, I love food, I love restaurants, and my partner was a stay-at-home person. And I'm like, obviously you can't predict everything, but did this not come up early on in the engagement process? Was this not something that, if it was so vital to your core being, you didn't thought that it would be worth bringing up? If I thought something, for example, was core to my being as a person, my personality, I would make sure it's been brought up and talked about. And I think that in itself, this one little thing can lead to an automatic drop in divorce rates, because that will automatically eliminate a lot of marriages that are sort of built on rocky foundations, in my opinion. Because those meals out cost money. And as well as time. Does he have time? How many hours is he working? How much money does he have? Exactly. Or who's going to pay for the meals? If she's paying for the meals, where does her money go? Is she going to be resenting this? So
Yes, it needs to be
So
something
something like that, in my opinion, if people spend time talking about, look, maybe make a list. Say to them 10 things that they can't live without or do without or whatever. And if, look at each of the lists and go, will this work? Does this make sense? For example, I love to play computer games. I go home from work and I like to play 2 to 3 hours worth of computer games. If I then said to my potential fiance or wife, look, this is something that's core to me, I wouldn't function without this. And if she would then say, well, no, because I wouldn't want you to play that for that long, that's a potential issue. And because we haven't discussed it, and then later on it leads to a divorce, it's just such a huge lack of foresight, in my opinion. So I think just people should come up with a list of 10 things that they should just automatically discuss, and then slowly build it up that way.
And have those deep discussions, which are really, really important. And I think these should not be overlooked or discounted anyway. These deep discussions, not just talking about the weather, not just talking about the marriage, where we're going on honeymoon, the ring, the dress, the relatives that are coming, but about this future together, how we're going to live together closely. I heard today actually of somebody that was going through a bit of a rough time, but he said the final straw was when he was asked to iron his own clothes, and that was it, and he wanted a divorce after that. So things like that need to be discussed as well,
Because, the funniest thing is, right, we go through phases, I think, as a society where one phase is, for example, women should always iron their men's clothes. Another phase is, no, women should never iron them, And I think, in my opinion, it's based on the person. At the end of the day, it depends whether, if a husband, wants his clothes ironed and a wife doesn't, then that's obviously not going to work. For example, I don't care about ironing my clothes. It doesn't bother me at all. So if somebody said, I don't want to iron your clothes, I'd be like, that's fine. That's something that we can agree on. But people need to have those discussions.
Yeah.
People need to talk about, for example, money. People need to be talking about chores. People need to be talking about where they're living before and after. All of these things. Yeah.
Because I'm sure it's not the ironing the clothes was, when you peel that onion back, it is that he may have felt that this is not justifiable, right for him, that he shouldn't be ironing his clothes. So there's much more around this than just the physical, taking out the ironing board and ironing some pieces of material. There's more around how he was raised, what was done at home. This was a form of respect maybe for his family. His mum always did it for his dad's clothes as a form of respect. So there was a bit more to him than just ironing clothes. And she respects me by asking me this or doing these things. And marriage is a mutual agreement laid on respecting each other. So I respect you, you respect me. Respect have to be earned. It's not going to be just thrown around there. It has to be earned. One has to earn the respect from the other person, whether it is in ironing or different things. The respect is given in different ways. So I think couples don't see this, they think, okay, he didn't want to iron his own clothes, but actually there's more to it than that. There's more to the whole situation than this. And how can we leave it go that far? What they, as you were saying, by pre-marriage, what they need to be doing beforehand is talking and having these discussions as how we respect each other, how we acknowledge each other, how we support each other. If the time is short, how we can spend that quality time together, because maybe we're working away. Yeah. If money is short, how do we spend that money? How do we come to an agreement on these things? So you're nodding your head there to these things, to what we're just saying.
One of the most important things, in my opinion, about this is have these conversations prior to an engagement. Because I think what happens a lot of the time are people get engaged, in essence, and when they disagree on something, half the time they won't acknowledge it themselves. So they'll just think, oh, it'll be fine, we'll work through it. You talk and you realise, oh, there's a huge issue here. She doesn't want to iron my clothes. We'll take that as an example. We'll work through it. When actually, if you were being honest with yourself, you would probably know you would never work through that. But that's because you're sort of forced to come to that answer because you feel like you're already in it.
Yeah.
But if you do it a bit early on, prior to the engagement, and you're not feeling so pressurized to make it work, in essence, you would probably be a lot more honest with yourself, with them, and a lot of other things.
MashaAllah. I think after the break I'd like to come and discuss a bit more about your 3 ways of finding a wife. That's as interesting of yourself with friends or parents, and we explored that a little bit deeper, because even people that have friends or have parents, they are still in doubt and worry about these things. So I think we need to explore that a little bit more about that, as well as some other things to do with making sure that we find the right person and that we're content before marriage, and how do we give that person the stamp, so to speak, the stamp on the certificate beforehand that are we ever truly sure? So I'll let that with our listeners before we go into break, inshallah, that they can ponder on that, and maybe if they've got other questions they could email in the studio, inshallah, and we'll help them to answer this in future programmes, inshallah. We're just going into commercial break. Please, listeners, do tune in to us after this commercial break, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Parenting Hour. You're tuned in to Unity FM 93.5. I'm here with you as every Tuesday evening. You remember my name is Kathleen Roche-Nagi, and we are talking this evening with Brother Omar, mashallah, all about marriage. And I find it a very enlightening talking to such a young person with, I could say, a wealth of knowledge about the topic, mashallah. Obviously, he has explored it quite a bit himself. He's looked, he's observed, he's seen others, he's asked questions, what we should all be doing as we're growing up in teenage years. But I don't think a lot of young men are at the same stage as you, or young women for that matter, that they not observant, they don't ask questions of others, as well as looking at themselves, like what we mentioned earlier on. They need to be asking others, people as well, how did you know this was the right person for you? How did you do things? What went wrong for you? What tips would you give others? So sharing and learning from others is an important part of this process as well, that might get you thinking of things that you haven't thought of yourself. So as I spoke about before the break, I'd be really keen to talk a bit more about these 3 areas that you explained about trying to find a wife. So you mentioned finding it yourself in your own surroundings, getting your friends involved and asking them, and then your parents, and that the new trend nowadays is to get parents involved in asking them to find a suitable spouse for you or whoever wants to be married. Where would you start if you were to take this yourself? And a lot of people want this, actually. They will say, I will not get married until I find that person myself, because this is what all the films do, all the novels do, is finding that themselves. And if they follow that system, they really want to be able to find their own spouse themselves.
So first, I think I should start off by saying all of this I'm saying is based off personal observations, and this is what I've seen. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. Everyone runs in slightly different, social circles, different cultures, a lot of different things. So these are quite broad, but I do think that the 3 categories cover almost the majority of ways. For example, we'll take finding someone yourself. Now, in my opinion, there are so many different ways to find someone yourself. You may know somebody who's you work with at the ISOC, or you volunteer at the charity with, or you work with at work. Maybe somebody that you built up a friendship with. You could be your lab partner from A levels or university that you kept in contact with. That's the way that I think comes naturally to mind straight away when someone says find someone yourself.
So you don't mean going down Broad Street and finding somebody in Broad Street? At
the end of the day, and I can only make this again from a personal observation and from a personal level, and I think that's an important thing, because anybody who then sort of would try to portray something as a be-all and end-all statement fact on something like this would worry me. I think anybody who's, credible in the area or would like to offer their opinion should always say, look, this is my own personal opinion. And I think at the end of the day, my personal opinion would be try to find someone in a halal manner. Now, obviously, that sounds quite cliche again in TFM, all of these things, but I came to this conclusion myself after a long time of soul searching, that it just seems to be the best way, and that whether that's the flow of the universe, the qadr of Allah, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, that's just what seemed to work for me. That when you go about things in a certain manner, there just doesn't seem to be any, at the end of the day, the Islamic term is barakah in it. So there doesn't seem to be any barakah in a marriage that may not be sought in a halal manner. And again, people do mistakes. So this is the biggest, a lot of misconception is For example, you may make you may make a mistake. You may do something that you then later on regret slightly later on in your life. That doesn't mean that you all of a sudden chop and change your life completely. You may then come to a conscious decision going, okay, I did this. I want to do it the right way. How do I do it the right way? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can turn a situation that's not ideal into an ideal situation. It's obviously more complex, but that is one thing. But my opinion is, if you start it off the right way, it's just so much easier to stay on that path. Mm-hmm. So that is one way. Now, something that I think is a little taboo, a lot of people don't want to talk about, which is a bit weird because it's so commonplace now, is finding somebody online. Mm. And this is, you talk. Sometimes I'll have a mate and they'll be like, oh yeah, I've met this girl, whatever, so and so introduced her, and they're like my best friends, and they'll like later on tell me, no, actually I met them online. Like I met them on a website that's tries to match people up through matrimony and all these things. Yeah. And there's events people go to. Mm-hmm. People will go to a marriage event. There are so many different ways people find their own partner. Mm. That's why I think the term is really good, because it covers a lot of instances. So there are so many ways, and different ways are going to work for different people. Mm. Some people come across, maybe a social group that they instantly bond with, gel with. Their friends might be the perfect people for them, so it's easy for them to pick somebody out from their friends who they think might make a good partner. Not everybody has that luxury. Mm. Some people might be really adept at talking to people online. Yeah. I talk to some of my friends and they'll say to me, for example, I talked to a girl on the matrimony website. I didn't know what to say. Yeah. I asked them what's their favourite colour, and some people are more adept at
talking online, because some people like it because they don't have that face-to-face, so they're not embarrassed either. They can talk easier online than they can talk face-to-face.
But on the flip side, some people have natural physical charisma, and therefore that doesn't translate online.
Yes.
So I think it's about finding what works for you. So that, in my opinion, covers some of the ways of finding somebody yourself. And again, I think it's something that a lot of people now are taking almost as their primary option. Or at least that's what I kind of feel from the anecdotal evidence I'm getting from my friends is, if I took 100 friends, maybe 70% of them want to choose a partner themselves.
Do you think that that's up to a certain age group, and then after that age that they start looking more at trusting their friends and their parents, that initially they have this concept because they feel, I've got my own degrees myself, I've got my job myself, I need to choose my wife myself, or vice versa, I need to choose my husband myself. My parents don't need to tell me these things.
So that is a huge part, in my opinion, that plays in it, that at the end of the day, people... And again, we're going to give really broad age categories based on observations. Don't take it as rules. So I would say anyone maybe under the age of 35. They feel that that's it, that, they are the happening people. They're the most progressive people. They're the people that push the boundaries, broke into new jobs, all of these things. And, in a lot of the times they've pushed the boundaries of, careers further than anyone. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were about 19 years old. And they were like, I did 8 A-levels. And I was just like, how many?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was like, and I can understand how somebody who's pushed themselves can now all of a sudden think that they may know better than a lot of people because they're maybe the first to have done something. So in that circumstance, I think that does play a huge part in it. One of the other things I think that makes people do this, though, is there is a stigma attached to the other two options, I think. And sometimes people who may think in the back of their heads that another option is better for them, but they don't want that stigma attached to them. They don't want to say, my dad found me my wife.
Yeah.
And even though they may think that actually my dad's, a really good judge of character, my dad loves me, he would only want the best for me, they don't actually, in a circumstance like that where somebody should say to themselves, okay, maybe I can loop my parents in early on in the process, don't want to because they feel like there's a stigma attached to it. And I'd be very wary, and I'd say to that person, be careful that doesn't push you into the wrong category.
Yes, indeed. So you have to be very careful like this, that you can respect your parents and everything else.
Another thing that I think is really important that a lot of people should realise, and it's quite funny because you can almost make these two statements, the two polar opposite statements, and they're both almost equally true. On one hand, a marriage is between a husband and a wife. On the other hand, a marriage is more than two people. two polar opposite statements and both equally is true. Firstly, you should try to always make sure that you remember that a marriage, at the end of the day, when the lights are turned off, you guys are at home, it's a husband and wife. But as the same opposite side of the coin, it's more than two people. It's families joining each other. It's friends joining each other. It's so much more. And I think a lot of people need to take that into account. And this is obviously more prevalent and a more important factor to consider when you are finding somebody yourself.
I definitely agree with that. Sorry to butt in there, but I never thought of this myself when I was young growing up. I was in the perception that it's only marriage is him and her, that's it. And I went abroad to find my husband, and that was it. I didn't think of families coming together. It was only when my own daughter was getting married and the fact of two families coming together like this and how we got on with each other, I really then understood the impact of this, of really families need to be there and need to be supporting that young couple. And if that young couple have problems, it is the family they'll first turn to, or the family that first will pick up on things that might be happening. And they're their first source of support.
So, I think a lot of people, and again, this is something that people need to consider more, especially when they are finding somebody themselves, is that think about the wider picture. For example, think, will my parents, not like something about my wife? Something simple that, could be easily resolved? Or, for example, does my father maybe have the polar opposite personality of my potential future father-in-law? These things people need to consider. The other thing people need to consider is, don't just turn up home one day and say to your parents, okay, I'm getting married. I found the person. I've decided. Everything is good. While that may be the case, you may have just picked the most perfect person for yourself. You may have, somehow found your golden goose at the end of the day. I'm not saying you have it, but I'm just saying even if you had, there is still a respectful way of going about things on both sides. It may be a case that you go to your father and be like, look, Dad, I'm thinking about getting married. Your father may just say, okay, that's good. Turn up to me whenever you're ready for the wedding. Give me a wedding card. Someone's father may say that to them. I actually know people's fathers who are like that.
Wow.
Who will just say, okay, I trust you 100%, just turn up with a wedding card, let me know. Other people's fathers want to be looped in, and you'll never really know until you've asked them. Sometimes people might consider their fathers to be the most laid-back person in the world, and then all of a sudden they've not really considered it. They've gone to their fathers and they've gone, I didn't think my dad would have an issue, but he does. Again, it's just I would say it's almost like a little checkbox on your tick list before. Just make sure, talk to them.
And what about the mothers? Do you think this is only dads or mothers also?
I say fathers, I mean parents in general. It's obviously just easier because, again, that archetypal, father figure, again, it's a bit easier sometimes for people to identify with. But you're right, mothers, brothers, uncles, grandparents, so many things. Whoever's important in your life, again, that person should be important in the decision making, is a good rule of thumb in my opinion. If you have brothers who you aren't very close with, but you have a best friend who is almost like your kin, that's a good rule of thumb to talk to them about it. Sometimes people don't, for example, take their friends into account.
Yeah.
And they'll go to their friends really excited, and their friends will be like, well, we didn't know we were going to lose you.
Yeah.
They fall out with their friends. Sometimes I've heard stories of people's best friends not turning up to weddings because they fell out before all of these things. And again, it's just really easy to start off a conversation. When you feel like you're ready, go and talk to your parents first.
Right,
say,
really
I think I'm ready. What do you guys think?
And what happens if the parents think you're not quite ready yet?
Talk to them. And again, it's about being respectful. You need to take your own opinion into matter. And my advice would be, a lot of the times, you will know yourself best. And you can sometimes say to yourself, Dad, I 110% respect your opinion, and I'm going to take a lot of your feedback on board. Your dad might say, well, you might think you're ready for marriage, but you don't get out of bed till 2:00 in the afternoon. And you may turn around to your dad and say, I completely respect that. You're right. I feel like I can change, and I'm going to prove it. And again, that's a way of having a situation and sort of having your father's opinion, taken into account, your opinion taken into account. And I think I'm making it sound easy. I'm not going to lie. I would love to say that life was this easy, but in certain circumstances it can be. So we just need to try, in my opinion. just talk to people. So I would say there are a couple of phases. First phase, when you decide you are ready for marriage, before you do anything else, go talk to people. Go talk to your family. Say, okay, I've been, doing some soul searching for a while. I feel like I'm ready for marriage. They might just say, okay, that's good, Then the second stage would be when you found somebody who you're seriously considering. You've thought about everyone, then you've sort of hinted at it with one of your friends, and your friends been quite reciprocal. Go to your parents and say, look, there's this boy. We've been, friends for a long time. He volunteers at the same charity as me, and we've just known each other as, good colleagues. I hinted to him that it was the right time to get ready to get married. He said the same thing. Let me tell you a bit about him. And that's the second phase, in my opinion, is quite early on in the series of considering someone. Then, again, you can talk to the person, and then once you've made your decision, go again and talk to them. And I think those three phases are the most important. And if you do that, you can eliminate a lot of the family issues early on, in my opinion.
And when would it be then that you would get recommendations from the other person? Because each family would need to investigate really that person. Is that person the right person for my son or daughter? Is that person able to support my daughter? Is that person committed to this? What commonalities do we have as wider families? What commonalities do we have? What difference do we have? How can we overcome this? So how can you overcome this? And different cultures probably expect different things. But I would like to be very sure that I'm letting my daughters into somebody's hands, that I'm letting them into the right person's hands. So can you tell us modern day now, what do people do usually like this? Do they have references? Do they go and ask people, can you be my reference for me? And then and get their father to make a phone call to that father?
So I think as time goes on and, society becomes a bit more sort of intermixed, the deviation in the ways that getting this done is becoming huge, where there used to be maybe a set procedure. There isn't that so much anymore. Some people may want to stick to the old way of, I'm going to ask everyone in the area what that family's like. Other people might go, all right, give me the names, I'll Facebook search them. That could easily be a very viable way to do research in today's time. Go onto Twitter, go onto Facebook, find out what their family's like. And a lot of people, they do post quite a lot of telling signs on their social media pages. Again, my opinion would be this can easily be a pitfall. I do hear stories of people's parents sometimes giving unrealistic or unfair criterias. For example, people's parents will say, he seems like a nice boy, but he's not the right, ethnicity. And again, this is something that a lot of people do need to take into account and consider. But it's all about trying to logically approach it with your parents and say, look, I appreciate what you're trying to say. Majority of the time, the only reason they're saying it is because they perceive that two cultures don't intermingle as well, and therefore the marriage won't be as stable. Now, so if we broke it down to that, then what we see is our parents are taking our best interest at heart. If that is the case, then explaining to them logically as we can, look, this is the reason why I think that it's not a case. And to all the parents out there, a lot of the times in today's societies, people identify themselves as British Muslims. So whether they come from an Egyptian background, a Pakistani background, an Irish background, whatever it is, if they, if they consider themselves British Muslims, the chances is they're going to have a lot in common. And that in itself is quite a huge tick. But even if it's not, take a case by case basis. And I know it's hard. Everyone has biases. Everybody has their own preferences. But try not to force them on your kids. Have their best interest at heart. And every time you want to say something to your child or you want to disagree with them, just ask yourself, is this in the best interest of my son and daughter, and for their long-term happiness? And let that be a guiding principle for a lot of people.
So is there an approach, because I tend to like the approach of a mutual friend or an acquaintance, where you can ask them, not so many, just one or two people that you really trust, that are trustworthy, that know this whole commitment of marriage, and know that they're saying something that Allah is watching them, and will give the truth about the person, that yes, he is genuinely caring, considerate, hard-working, or his faults are like this, but, you know, I wouldn't, if it was my daughter, I would say, go ahead, and, you know, people like that you can actually get solid advice, yes or no. Would you recommend that process of having those recommended people?
So firstly, I'd like to approach this with, if you are ever asked this question, if one of your friends says to you, or somebody says, what about this person? That in itself is an amana. You know, when somebody gives you this trust of asking your opinion whether they should spend the rest of their life with this other person, take that with full seriousness, take that with full honesty. That's what I'm going to start off with, because don't just think, oh yeah, he's a friend, I'll just sort of like, you know, be nice to both of them, pander the truth a little. Don't do that. Whenever this happens in life, this is a serious amana at the end of the day. So take that with its full weight. But I would agree that is generally the best way. But that's from a personal level. I found this to be the best way. Because I think, again, with me and my friends, because a lot of my friends are really close, we understand each other the best. You know, my friends know that I get a bit touchy when I'm hungry. You know, they know that about me. They've, you know that about me, appreciate that about me, and got used to that about me. They would then be able to sort of tell that to somebody. Go, yeah, he's really nice, except, you know, when he's really hungry. So avoid him in Ramadan. You know, stuff like that. For example, that is a really good way, because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't like you when someone's touchy at all, ever. And then that's a really good way of, you know, finding a lot of these things out. So I would agree that talking to mutual friends or, you know, stuff like that is a good way to sort of seek references and stuff.
I do think it does help when you seek right references about people, and that they are telling the truth. I know some people have in the past, as you say, weakened the icing and made the icing look very nice, but actually not wanting to tell the whole truth. But this is an obligation on each one of us, indeed, and it's one of the only times that we can tell things about people, that we're not backbiting them, and we're not going to be facing Allah in the wrong way because of this. Great, so here we are now. We think we have found the right person. We have put a person forward. The references are going through. Everything seems right about that person, and you want to proceed further. So what's the next stage? How's the next stage? Is there a period of time that people nowadays think, a short period of time or a long period of time? I've come across a lot of marriages that they said, I only knew him for 3 days and I was married. Why I worry about that in modern day time is that sufficient amount of time. It has worked for some people. So what's the magic around this?
Firstly, I think if somebody says, look, I've spoken to them, I've spoken to their family, I've spoken to their friends, we've checked everything, I've done the checkbox, and the results come back as a 100% definitive, this person is perfect, I would say stop there firstly. Take a moment out, because nobody is ever going to be perfect. And it's sort of like, how many people buy brand new cars? They go there, they test drive them, they check them, all of these, you know, everything, and they'll read car reviews. 6 months later, you bought a brand new car and your fan fails. How are you ever to know that? But we've accepted that as a possibility, and I think a lot of the times people don't accept that as a possibility when it comes to marriage. And
this is after all their reviews and looking and learning.
Because people think that, okay, I've done my research, and then they come across a bump in the future or a fault happens, to use a car analogy.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah, they don't understand.
Yeah.
That they're like, no, but I did my due diligence. I checked. Did you recheck? You know, families were fine, she was fine, friends were fine. But we come into this issue because a lot of the times people need to appreciate you're never going to be 100% sure.
Yeah.
You could probably be married for 80 years, be on your deathbed holding hands, and I would say still you're probably not 100% sure. You may be 99.999% sure, but chances is you'll never be. And this is a common problem. And the thing is, right, when people talk about divorce, sometimes people think divorce happens within a year. Some people think divorce happens after 2 years. A lot of times I talk to people and they're confused when couples get divorced 10 to 15 years later. Like, I don't understand. How do you stay married to somebody for 10 to 15 years and get divorced later? Because a lot of the times people don't understand that issues can crop up whenever. They may crop up. You may have 20 years of perfect, and then 20 years you may have your first issue.
Yeah.
And so you're never 100% sure that everything is going to be perfect. And I think people need to go in with that mindset.
And keep Allah in the marriage, where we know Shaitan is always there waiting to break up marriages, but actually if we keep Allah in the middle of that marriage, so you have a husband and wife and Allah coming together, making our intentions together, doing things together, trying to live your Islam together, inshallah, and praying for that you will stay together. How many couples actually pray for this, that they will grow together as they grow older, that they grow more loving together as they grow older, more kind or understanding, that this will grow as they grow older, and that love will blossom as they grow older, inshallah.
This reminds me of a story, the Islamic story of when the shaitan is sitting there and he has his, shayateen coming to him, and one shayateen will say, today I managed to get someone to commit zina, and the guy's like, here's a silver medal. So today I managed to convince someone to commit murder. Here's a gold medal. Oh, today I managed to do this. Oh, here's a diamond. And then so one of them comes and says, today I managed to get a couple to become divorced. And the shaitan says, you are the top. You have now won the prize, the cup. You've won the World Cup of, doing the things. Because, again, the shaitan loves to see couples, break apart.
Yeah.
And I think people need to appreciate that as well. That they need to protect themselves, not only against themselves, not only against their partner, but against shaitan. And the only person that can protect you, amongst all of these three things is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly.
And I think people do need to take that aspect in, because it can help so much. When you use that as your shield, in my opinion, it protects against so many issues. So I would strongly encourage that people go in with this mindset. I will have issues. I will have problems. Sometimes they will do something that will annoy me. Sometimes I will do something that will annoy them. Sometimes shaitan will come and creep in and make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
But in every circumstance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be there and protect us. Again, that just resolves a lot of issues, in my opinion.
Brilliant. I think we have to end the show now, but I think we've had lots of great conversations there. Keep Allah into the marriage when the marriage is there. I'm sorry, Brother Omar, we've run out of time. It's wonderful talking to you. Inshallah, we'll have another conversation soon again about marriage. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.